The year is 1944. The German army is on the defensive nearly everywhere it is engaged. American and British forces had landed in Normandy and rushed across France, approaching the German border. In the east, the Soviet Union launched Operation Bagration, which allowed it to retake all of Byelorussia and gain a foothold in Poland. German cities were being relentlessly pounded by Allied aircraft. Hitler decided to throw the dice one last time in a desperate attempt to turn the tide. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Hitler had faith that this offensive could turn the tide. He wanted to achieve a decisive victory and force the Americans and British to the negotiating table so that he could turn all his resources to facing the Soviet Union in the east. 29 German divisions would take part in the attack, with 12 of them being armored. The primary objective was to capture the port of Antwerp in Belgium. Most of Hitler's generals had little faith in the plan. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundsted and Field Marshal Walter Model thought the attack would leave their forces exposed to counterattack, and did not think that reaching Antwerp was even possible. The alternate plans they proposed were ultimately rejected by Hitler. Hitler foolishly thought he could recreate his victory over France in 1940. But circumstances had drastically changed. The Allies now controlled the skies, which severely impeded German movement on the ground. The German forces were also very short on fuel. The fuel they did have was only enough for about 6 days of operations, so they were counting on capturing Allied fuel stores in order to keep the offensive going. Nevertheless, the Germans were able to form an attack consisting of 300,000 men, 2,100 tanks and assault guns, and 1,900 artillery pieces. The main thrust was to be made by the German panzers. Tanks like the Panther and Tiger II gave the Germans a significant edge in armor and firepower. For example, the Tiger II was capable of knocking out any Allied tank at a range of about 2.5 kilometers, or 1.6 miles. However, the tank was unreliable, the engine was underpowered, and it needed lots of fuel, which the Germans had in short supply. In the early hours of December 16th, the German artillery opened fire on the Allied lines. The attack started well for the Germans. They had achieved surprise, and the poor weather forced Allied aircraft to stay grounded. However, stiff American resistance was able to sour the German offensive. St. Vith was supposed to be captured by the second day of the offensive, but American forces were able to hold the Germans back for 5 days. American forces were completely encircled at Bastogne but desperately held out, even with dwindling supplies. The issues surrounding fuel shortages were beginning to show. The German advance was not quick enough, and as a result, the Allies were able to evacuate or destroy many of their fuel reserves. The Germans failed to capture vital roads, which caused traffic jams to form. This only served to amplify the fuel shortage problems. On the 23rd, the weather began to clear and the Germans began to feel the might of Allied air power. Allied aircraft pounded German armor and supply routes. They dropped supplies to the seriously deprived troops. The U.S. Third Army, led by General George S. Patton, counterattacked and relieved the Americans surrounded at Bastogne. The battle was becoming one of attrition, which the Germans had no chance of winning. The tide had turned. The Germans desperately tried to regain the initiative by launching a campaign to secure air superiority. The operation was able to destroy many Allied aircraft, but the Germans suffered many losses themselves that they could not replace. The Americans continued to counterattack, and by the end of January, the Germans were pushed back to their starting lines. Germany's last major offensive was over. It was only a matter of time until total defeat.